Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Blackstack Brewing, now in the store near you. I'm John Bonus, the Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic. It's a good thing they're in a store near you, Aaron Gleeman, because last night about 11:30, I texted a few people you know who I was planning on going out with after the game tonight and said, I hope you guys are ready to get ugly drunk tonight.
Is that, like I think it's called like a macro command on a computer where you just press one button I guess, and it does the same thing every time?
Yeah, I've programmed my iPhone so that if I just type Dan Hayes.
Well, yeah. Right. You just
it comes up, I hope you're ready to get ugly drunk tonight.
Right. It's like how like Gmail now it gives you like 3 kind of AI responses that you can click. So as soon as you pull up Dan Hayes on your text, it says, like, would you like to tell him you're getting ugly drunk tonight or not? It's like, yeah, I'm okay, fine.
I woke up this morning feeling hungover, despite the fact I did not drink at all yesterday at the game. We had a run this morning, so I drank like 3 double liters of water, like maybe a gallon of water at that game yesterday. But I still felt like I needed to flush the toxins from my body this morning.
Well, the season is kind of a toxin.
That's what I said. The toxins being these last 5-6 weeks.
Yeah. We got a lot to talk about. It's not going to be a real fun episode. There hasn't been that many fun episodes for a while.
That's right.
We've kind of resorted to gallows humor, which we probably will again today.
We should just give a heads up. We are going to have some episodes next week, I think.
Yes.
Like I'm almost sure there will be a post-mortem on this season that we usually have with Falvey and Baldelli. It'll be interesting to see who is available, who is not available for that.
Yeah.
And that will probably do an immediate reaction to that on the Patreon.
Yeah, there's always some news and notes at the very least.
We always ask about the payroll during that, what they think the payroll is going to be.
That's my macro. Yours is my macro.
I was the one who asked about the payroll.
That's true, but I mean,
last couple of years, yeah.
Believe me, Dave St. Peter and Falvey and everybody—they're sick of our shit.
It will be interesting to see who's made available for that. Will we see Dave St. Peter at that meeting this year?
I mean, we never have.
Never have.
Yeah. So I guess let's just get into it. I mean, first of all, you were correct. Oof, pains. In my chest. I feel pain when I say that. You were correct. When you repeatedly, and I would argue annoyingly,
refused to commit to the worst loss of the season.
You were right. You were right.
Yep.
Are you ready to declare it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll do.
Because I was going to have you locked up.
That'll do.
Yeah,
it will take a hell of a run. Like, it would have to be, Twins sweep the next 2 games, Royals lose the next 2 games to the Braves, and then the early game, not the early game, but the Royals managed to fall way behind or something like that.
I don't know that you need to go into a whole scenario.
It's going to be tough to top last night.
John is so energetic. It's just
I had a run this morning.
Yeah. You need a nap or something.
I got those toxins out of me.
Yeah, okay. I think they're kind of built up. It's like a bear for hibernation.
That is true.
You have years of... But that was certainly the worst loss, and as you get deeper into the season, obviously, which was your argument for kind of waiting to declare it. First of all, I don't know why this is an obsession. That's become my obsession. That was yours.
I agree.
But that was certainly the ultimate kind of both nail in the coffin, because they're effectively done. Now we can talk about the tiebreaker scenarios and all that stuff. But it was both the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
It was the game itself was both
an encapsulation of the year.
Yes, and just a complete gut punch for, you got to play 4 hours for that to happen, and you're in the 13th inning, and you get scenario after scenario.
Did that make it 4.5 hours? I was wondering
it felt like
how long was that game?
Yeah, it felt like it. So
it was longer than this season, and this season's been a long season.
You're like a guy who's laughing at a funeral right now, John.
Gosh.
You cracking up. And so, I think that certainly, and then obviously from a playoff odds perspective, it took them from 20% to 2 or 3% right now. Right. Their only remaining path now to the playoffs, it's very simple, and we're recording this Friday morning. They need to sweep the Orioles, and then either the White Sox need to sweep the Tigers.
Although the White Sox have something to play for, interestingly enough, at this
good
point.
luck. So have the Twins for
Fair.
doesn't mean anything. Or the Braves have to sweep the Royals, either of those things.
I was just, maybe you should call them the White Hot White Sox, seeing as they just swept.
Or the Horse S Angels. It doesn't. I mean, we saw the Angels. By the way, the Angels are, I believe, the only series the Twins have won.
Yeah, I think you're right.
This month.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm pretty sure.
You're right.
And so, it's their magic number, I guess, whatever the elimination number, let's call it, is 1. Any Twins loss or on either path, as soon as the Twins lose and the Tigers win,
right,
or just the Twins lose, but it can also be a win on either side. So each Tigers win or each Royals win puts them in. And so they have 2 paths, but they're identical path, which is sweep plus sweep. And so you can do the math on that. The odds, let's just for the sake of simplicity,
get a coin flip.
Each game is a coin flip, roughly. Now, you're playing the White Sox. It's not it, but whatever. A sweep is like 12%, or I guess 12.5%. It's just
1 in 8.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when you need 2 sweeps to happen, you can just multiply that.
Yeah.
And
you've got a second one.
And then you double it because there's 2 paths to it, basically. Sure. And so, it's 2 or 3%, something like that. It's over. And I think most likely, because the Twins play tonight at 7:10 and those other 2 teams play at 5:40 and 6:10, by the time the Twins game starts, it's very possible that they have a pretty good idea that they're done.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody's up 4-0 or something like that.
I mean, that was one of the things that made last night's game. We both of the games that they were watching were afternoon games.
Right.
They went into that game knowing the tragic number, the elimination number was 2. Right. For them to keep any hope alive whatsoever, it became a almost must-win game.
Right. Because the Royals and the Tigers both played right around noon, and they both at various points. I mean, the Tigers were down 3-0 basically the whole game to Tampa Bay and came back and won.
Of course.
And the Royals were playing the Nationals. They jumped out to like a 4-1 lead, and then the Nationals hit a 3-run homer to tie it at 4-4, and they got deep into that game, and the Nationals had their closer in, and I'm getting ready to go to Target Field. I'm in the shower, and I got the audio from the game playing in my little Bluetooth speaker in the shower. Yeah. And the guy walked 3 batters in the inning. They're all, their closer, and gave up 3 or 4 runs. And I'm like, okay, that's enough of that, basically. And they were in.
So with the bases loaded in like a late game situation where they have to push a runner across. You're saying the Royals were able to do that?
Yeah, several times, which I've never seen from the Twins. It seems like. And like you said, yesterday's game specifically was. I mean, I can't imagine a more frustrating game other than just getting blown out or something. But Festa pitched okay. Yeah, pitched fine. The bullpen comes in
4 1/3 innings and then runs out of gas.
He was fine.
Right, that's right.
The bullpen comes in and throws 7 shutout.
Right,
which they also did that in Festa's last start, which was a 12-inning win in Boston.
Yep, and
then they also did that a few games ago. I forget who was the pitcher. Simeon Woods Richardson.
Yeah,
where he exited and then they threw
that was literally 2 days ago.
Yeah, I've lost track.
Right, yeah. It was the one game they won.
So I mean, the bullpen, and ultimately in these type of games, if the offense never scores, the bullpen will eventually lose.
Right, of course.
So then you go, well, Scott Blewett took the loss and he allowed 3 runs. It's like they almost threw a shutout as a bullpen.
Yes,
you can't blame the bullpen. It's the same.
Blewett also pitched a scoreless 11th inning or something where they were started with a runner on second base.
Right. There were 2 opportunities for the Twins
to just
put
one
run across with a free runner at second base and no outs, and they couldn't do it. They went 2 for 19 with runners in scoring position, as Rocco Baldelli pointed out post game. We went 2 for 19. And one of those 2 didn't even score a run because it was Larnach's hit that was hit too well, and they had to hold the guy up at third. So that, like you said, encapsulated a lot of what's gone wrong over these last 6 weeks or so, which is they just cannot put runs across. We've also seen some versions where the bullpen blows a rare lead.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that as much lately, and we've seen some versions where the pitching just isn't there overall. Sure. But the thing that we've seen that I think maybe is probably the most frustrating from like a viewership standpoint, like an experiential standpoint, is just over and over again putting runners on base or getting free runners in the case of the extra innings and just not being able to have any semblance of professional hitting ability to even make productive outs because or
not finding any sort of creative way to move the runner along.
They started bunting even, and they can't. Like Jeffers pops a bunt up in a double play. That was one of the worst things I've seen this season.
that was the. Interestingly enough, that was the play that everybody seemed to want to talk about post game. Because it just sort of encapsulated where this team has been.
Because he also dropped a great throw from Correa.
Castro or Correa? It was
Correa, I think. Just at the plate, chest high, would have been a force out, and he just dropped it, and that scored a run, too, earlier in the game. But this is something...
he also didn't hit much either.
So well, yeah. He flew out with the
couple different
bases loaded, I want to say, or popped out. But...
I kept wanting to look up today. I still haven't done it. The WPAs from yesterday because there's
wild.
Some doozies.
The bullpen
WPA just has to be brutal.
The lineup, was like because the way win probability added, the way it works is at the beginning of a game, just for simplicity, each team starts out with 50% of a win.
Right.
And so at the end of a game, one team will have captured the other team's 50% of a win. Is the way I like to think of it.
Right.
But the thing is, you can lose or capture more than a win.
Right.
Because you can capture it on the pitching side and then give it away on the hitting side or vice versa.
That's right.
And so at the end of the game, I believe, I looked at the Fangraphs, and sometimes it gets like cleaned up the next day.
Sure.
Like they'll go through and some weird plays and stuff. But the Twins lineup had lost 3 games. Equivalent of 3 games.
Are you saying -1.5 or -3?
No, -1.5.
Okay, yeah, okay, got it. Yeah.
So they've given away basically their share of 3 fresh start games.
That sounds about right.
And it does make sense in that the bullpen not only threw 7 shutout,
right,
but in increasingly high leverage spots to the point that just plating 1 run would have won the game and captured the other team's percentage. So it was bad. I think, I don't really want to obsess too much about that specific game, although there was plenty about it to get mad about. I mean, it was one of the worst games they've played. But it was just kind of it's like remembering.
The poop icing on the crap cake is what it was.
Well, okay, that's more poetic than what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, it's like remembering the exact mile marker where your car ran out of gas.
Sure, right.
But not filling up with gas was your problem. Like it was going to run out of gas.
You don't blame the mile marker.
Right, exactly.
That's right, yeah.
But we will be able to point to this game as like, well, that's the point where it just evaporated, basically. And I think, so they're now 12-24 since August 18th.
Yeah.
Which is almost a quarter of an entire season. They've played at a 108 loss pace, which again is just
that's a 54 win pace for the mathematically challenged.
They have back-to-back wins as we talk about these scenarios where they have to sweep and the other team has to get. They've had back-to-back wins, which isn't asking a lot in baseball. 2 times since August 18th.
Okay,
in 6 weeks they've had back-to-back wins. They haven't had 3.
I didn't think they'd.
They haven't had 3 straight wins.
No.
Back-to-back wins twice in 6 weeks. That's amazing.
I don't remember those back-to-back
wins. They beat the Angels, like I just said,
okay, right, yes,
which is like a little league team at this point. Even the White Sox have swept them. And then they had a stretch at the beginning of September where they won the last game of the Toronto series and the first game of the Tampa Bay series. Right. That's the only time they've won back-to-back games in 6 weeks. Over the course of 36 games, they've won back-to-back games there twice. And so, I mean, the idea that they're even going to sweep the Orioles is so far-fetched that it's like...
Well, I mean, we've spent a lot of time in the last 5-6 weeks kind of analyzing, what are the chances of this? What are the chances of that? What do we need to happen? What are we watching? Scoreboard watching? And increasingly, you come to the realization, none of that matters if you're just going to play like the worst team in baseball. And that's what they're playing like.
You have to at least stop your free fall and stabilize things a bit. And I'm not saying you have to go and win 5 out of 6. You just have to win a series at some point to allow another team to fall past you. You know what I mean? And they just never did that. And the truth is, like, they put themselves in position by struggling for 6 weeks, like you said, as basically the worst non-White Sox team in baseball, or I guess non-White Sox, non-Angels now. They put themselves in position that no matter what they did over this final homestand, they were going to need a lot of help from one or both of the Royals and the Tigers.
Or at least a little help.
Right.
And they got none.
And they received none.
Right.
And so it became kind of a moot point on both fronts. It became a moot point because the Twins didn't help themselves, and then it became a moot point because they weren't getting the benefit from other teams.
I mean, both teams swept. Both the Tigers and the Royals ended up sweeping in this second to last series.
You can do math. It dries up real quick there. So it is kind of crazy that 6 weeks ago, they were 70-53. They had won the first 3 games in Texas. They were rolling. They had some injuries, but at that point, they were like 10 games up on the Tigers, just as an example. They had a 90-something % playoff odds, and actually at that stage, it was like, wow, they're playing really well, and imagine when some of these big names start to come back healthy.
That's right.
And 2 things happened. One, some of the big names never came back. Joe Ryan, Brock Stewart, etc.
Right.
And some of the big names came back much, much, much later with Buxton and Correa specifically than you ever imagined. And by the time...
And some of the guys who you were in the lineup who had just recently come off the IL, like Lewis or Miranda, like both of those guys had come off the IL, as I recall, beginning of August. And you're like, well, the guys got to play themselves into shape.
They just
fell off a cliff.
If anything, it got worse as it went along.
Of course.
Which we can talk about that too. And so, but it's remarkable that you're 70-53 and you're in prime playoff position. And they collapse to such an extent that the final weekend of the season isn't even going to matter.
Right.
Like, that's really hard to do. Like, if you're at 70-53 and 95% to make the playoffs with 6 weeks left, and essentially the 6th of those 6 weeks doesn't even matter, in a lot of ways. So,
at the beginning of August, they had swept a doubleheader against Cleveland and then failed to actually build on that. They didn't win the Saturday and Sunday game, right? Then they went into a series with Kansas City. We thought big series. They won the first 2 games of that series, enough to get the tiebreaker over Kansas City. Right. So we felt good about that. Then they went to Texas. They looked pretty good in Texas.
They won the first 3, and they had a 4-0 lead in the 7th inning of the 4th game. And then the bottom just fell out.
That's right.
And it's also along those same lines. Like, it's remarkable that having the tiebreaker over the Tigers, the Royals, and the Mariners, which were the 3 teams you were competing with essentially for a wild card spot at the end, didn't even come into play at all. Didn't even come close to coming into play.
I mean, it's why they still have a tragic number of 1 right now.
Instead
but that's
of 0.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think we're not going to talk a ton about this because we have a lot to get to. There's a lot of rage to get to and ranting to get to. So we're not. But we talked on the Patreon side about some of the comments post game earlier in this homestand from Baldelli and Correa about the lineup's lack of execution, and Correa called out some of the young players for not putting in the work pregame and not, from an effort level or a consistency level. We can talk a little bit about that. And so I think certainly the frustration is boiling over. There's no way for a team to go from 70-53 to losing 24 out of 36 and not have some level of frustration boil over. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You have a team in any competitive environment, that's going to be the case. But my takeaway from these last couple of days being in the clubhouse pre and post game and stuff, and it's not like, I've had some great insightful conversation with anybody, but the vibe I get is, there's frustration, there's disappointment, there's all those, buzzwords that you want to attach to it. But I really felt the vibe of them being shell-shocked by what happened. And because it's like we were talking about,
I am too.
They went into free fall, and it's not that a team thinks they're immune to that, but you think at some point you're going to latch onto something that you can at least stop it, if only briefly.
Right.
And they just never stopped the free fall, and it's almost like they didn't have a chance to get their bearings even, and so they just kind of looked up, and 6 weeks had gone by, and they're just done.
Yeah.
And that's the vibe I got from not so much Baldelli, but from a lot of the players and, talking to some of their support staff and stuff. It's just like, what happened here? And I mean, I have that feeling as well. I mean, in terms of what actually happened, we're going to get into some of that stuff. But yeah, that's the takeaway here. And, after the fact, or I guess with 3 games remaining, you look at what happened and you go, look, this just wasn't going to ever come together from injuries, poor performance, the payroll, the lack of front office moves. But if you go listen to the show we recorded, whatever the most recent one after August 17th.
Right, yeah.
Or probably Maybe not the 18th because they had blown that lead,
Yeah,
but
that's
like
right.
2 days earlier,
There was
whatever.
a Patreon the day after they blew that lead at
Right.
Alcala.
But
right.
I'm saying that one we were probably pretty dour just because
Right.
that was a
That's
rough
right.
game. But either way, this was so not even on anyone's radar, like within the realm of possibility. And like I tweeted out this morning, the Fangraphs projection, a daily projection of their playoff odds, and it looks basically like someone was on a roller coaster and they were going up and it was ticking up, up, and it just fell down.
Yep.
And like you get to the end of a roller coaster, and a lot of times you're just like, that was crazy. What just happened? And that's kind of like what this is. You didn't have time to really, not savor it, but like you didn't even really have time to like process as it was happening because it happened in like 2 seconds.
Right.
And 6 weeks is not 2 seconds, but in a weird way, it kind of, to me at least, and I think to a lot of the players, it felt like that. So before we get into some big picture ranting, probably some smaller picture stuff like you were talking about with specific players, let's just talk first about our first couple of sponsors here. One is our presenting sponsor that John mentioned at the start of the show, which is Blackstack.
And I've got good news. You're able to find Blackstack everywhere right now. And that's a boon. Well, it's probably especially a boon when you're mourning over a Twin season that is lost. It's also, Oktoberfest time. It's a time that a lot of people get to try a lot of new beers. And it's also like, they have been recognized as one of the best breweries. They're the ones that everybody wants to do collabs with. They've got incredible IPAs. They've got a whole array of other ones. But they haven't been widely available. You basically had to go to kind of specialty beer liquor stores.
Now they're starting to get distribution in a lot of liquor stores,
Yeah.
and they're growing all the time. You can go, if you go to Google Blackstack beer and go to their website, and there's a list, there's a page that'll just show all the places that they're adding.
Yeah, it's a where to buy page, right? But also just check out at your liquor store because they are available all over the state of Minnesota, not just locally here in the Twin Cities anymore. From Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo, you can find your favorites, including... Listen, I got a text from one of the Twins beat writers. You can probably guess who. Which of these IPAs should I be trying? And among those IPAs was their flagship, which is the local 755 New England IPA. So, listen, stop by Blackstack Brewing. They also have a tap room, 94 and 280. Big, nice tap room, great place. But even easier, just ask for them for your local liquor store. You're going to love Blackstack Brewing. I'm excited to get my hands on some of their beer this weekend.
And then our next one is a longtime sponsor, Harry's Razors. If you were growing a playoff beard,
now it is time.
now order some Harry's Razors and go and cut that thing.
That's right.
Harry's kind of, in a way, like revolutionized the.
They reinvented this industry.
Yeah, they basically cut out the middleman, and so they engineer their own razors and shaving kits and all that stuff.
And no longer do they no longer do you have to purchase space on shelves and all this stuff and
for the customer, what that means is two things. One, you don't have to go to the store and talk someone to opening up a case for you to give you some razors. And then the other thing is the ease of getting it. You just order it, it shows up, delivered, nicely packaged, good presentation. Yeah. Quickly, you can pause or
about
start
half
it.
The price.
And that's the other thing. By cutting out the middleman, they've cut the price too. So it's quality-wise as good or often better than the competition.
Absolutely better. In part because they're just as good shaving and they're easier to get your hands on. Right. I never used to shave against the grain on my face. I shave against the grain every time now with Harry's razors. No problem.
So you can get started with the $13 trial set, like I was talking about, for just $3 by going to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's HARRYS.com/Gleeman for a $3 trial set, and you get the 5-blade razor, you get the shaving gel, you get the travel case, you get everything you'll need. It's like a starter pack kind of. Yeah. Harrys.com/Gleeman. Yeah. Okay. Let's get into the muck here a little bit.
We weren't in the muck?
No, there's more muck. There's so much muck,
okay,
John.
All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of muck. Big picture. We don't have to talk about tomorrow's game anymore. This is something, I think what is ultimately going to make this even more frustrating than just kind of the on-field component of it, which is, believe me, plenty frustrating, like we just talked about. But what's going to make it, to me at least, even more frustrating is this path that they were on. They briefly diverted from it by playing well. And people were like, okay, well, they're winning. So
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
Winning cures all. You can make all the bad decisions you want. You can do all the bad PR. You can wreck your fan morale.
You can take yourself off TV.
Yeah, you can do a lot of things.
Right.
But the thing that brings that all back to a positive is just win, baby.
That's right.
And they were doing that for the most part mid-season. But when it ultimately falls apart, I think what makes this almost like doubly frustrating or causing anger is that it was not difficult to think this was coming. Basically, going back to like last November, 10 months ago, let's say, when they started talking about dropping the payroll.
Sure.
And then we saw it play out in the offseason with, cheap, even for them, kind of scratch and dent type of bargain moves because they just didn't have any money. They actually had to trade Jorge Polanco's $10 million contract.
One of the foundations of this franchise.
And not that
10
overpriced.
years, right?
I mean, he ended up not having a good year in Seattle, but $10 million for a starting second baseman is not a crazy price. But they needed to shed that salary just so they would have $5 million to sign Santana
Right.
and bring in DeSclafani for. They didn't even have money to go out and spend $10 million. They had to get rid of a long time piece.
I mean, they actually had to. They really only saved $6 million because they had to take back the DeSclafani piece
Right.
as part of the.
And so
salary dump.
they had no chance of re-signing Sonny Gray and some other things like that. And so they were doing such low wattage moves throughout the offseason and even into spring training that people were like, well, we're seeing, you look at this roster and they wanted depth. They always want depth. And the depth is, Manny Margot.
Right.
And the depth is, these relievers, Jay Jackson and Josh Staumont and Steven Okert and guys like that, where you're like, okay, like for $1 million, these guys aren't the worst, and maybe they have some upside as like medium leverage relievers, but this is not, it was an underwhelming offseason. And what I will say is, at the time, I felt that Carlos Santana, for a 1-year, $5 million deal, is a 38-year-old first baseman who had pretty much 2 or 3 pretty mediocre seasons and was kind of trending down in his career at 38, not surprisingly. I grouped that into the same. I thought that was a pretty underwhelming move, too. It wasn't a horrible move because he's a functional first baseman and has been.
Sure.
But he
came at the right price. Like
Yes.
For $5 million for what we thought was going to be more of a platoon player,
Correct.
etc.
That my issue was more the expanded role, but he ended up being great defensively. He wasn't any better against right-handed pitching than I expected. He was actually pretty, poor against right-handed pitching as a left-handed hitter.
Sure.
But he was so good against left-handed pitching, and even I expected him to be good defensively, but he was phenomenal defensively.
Yes, right.
And so he ended up being actually a bargain at $5 million.
Yeah.
Every other move they made was a whiff. And they weren't even pop-ups or ground-up. They were just whiff. They basically went 1 for 7 in off-season moves for major league players. They whiffed on all the pitching moves.
Sure.
And then the other thing is, then at the trade deadline, when they have 10 games above 500 and they have a good chance at the playoffs, and they clearly needed pitching help.
Yeah.
You could make the argument maybe they needed some position player help as well, but they clearly needed pitching help. And what did they do? They did the same thing they did in the offseason, which they got the lowest wattage, cheapest, random middle reliever in Trevor Richards, and he didn't even make it to the end of the month. He didn't even make it to September. They cut him.
Ownership wasn't willing to spend any money on any of the other players, and management wasn't willing to trade any of the prospects for the things that were out there. I mean, between the two of them,
yes,
you got nothing.
They could have brought in higher caliber players than Trevor Richards, even with higher salaries. But what that would have required, because ownership was unwilling to just take on even $5 million in salary,
right,
was that the Twins would have required of the selling team that they eat the contract. And if you're a selling team, you're probably willing to do that, although some of the selling teams have owners who don't want to do that either.
Sure.
But what it requires of the Twins is, well, give me a better prospect or two better prospects. Or instead of asking for your number 10 prospect, we're just going to ask for Luke Keeschel or whatever it is. And the Twins were like, no, hell no. The front office was like, hell no. And so that's another domino effect of the payroll situation, is that it makes it even more difficult for that. So you toss in, as you mentioned, the mess of the TV situation, which actually got worse during the season when they fell off Comcast for 2 months or whatever.
And they recovered just in time.
Yeah, I was going to say, aren't you guys glad they were back on Comcast?
For 2 weeks, they were good on Comcast.
Watch that.
By the time people figured out how to get it.
And so between the payroll cut at the beginning of the offseason and the TV mess that dragged on throughout, the low wattage, low spending, budget cutting and talent shedding offseason. And then on July 30th, the low wattage, nothing burger of a deadline.
Right.
And then you put what did you say? The
poop icing on the crab cake.
Sure. Yeah. There's our first shirt we're going to of this collapse on the field.
Right.
This is just all of it coming to fruition in the worst fears that Twins fans had. The worst bit of skepticism and cynicism and woe is me were confirmed tenfold, that each kind of domino from the previous decision or the previous lack of urgency or lack of moves or poor moves played out like step by step. The owners cut the payroll. The front office with that lesser payroll had limited options and their degree of difficulty was raised. Mm-hmm. And then they whiffed on all the moves but one.
Right.
They get to the trade deadline, and in part because of the payroll being cut and those whiffs on the other moves, they needed pitching help. But it played out the same way where they just brought in some random guy who they cut 3 weeks later. And then with 6 weeks left in the season, they're out of gas. Needed help.
Right. That's right.
And they didn't have it.
That's right.
And as we'll talk about here in a minute, many of their key players who were there, they didn't need to be brought in, were either injured and or didn't perform.
Right.
And that's a huge part of it.
Or both.
And I don't think that should be overlooked.
Right.
And we'll get to that in a minute. But just from the most basic level, any fan who was paying any attention for the last 10 or 11 months, since last season ended, since the last out of last season, basically, I don't want to say saw this coming, but feared that this was coming. And to have it play out like step by step in the exact worst way possible, and then end with this thud like this is just not only confirming everyone's worst ideas or notions about what the Twins as an organization do and mean and care about from an ownership standpoint and all that. But I also just think coming off last year's success and the previous 3 or 4 years where they had spent at an average-ish level, which for them is pretty good, I think a lot of people feel like they were tricked or misled or bamboozled or whatever. Get out your thesauruses.
Right.
And I think that amplifies it even further.
It feels my reaction last night, and I think this morning, I'm not kidding about feeling like I needed to flush the toxins out of my body this morning. Like I woke up this morning feeling hungover. Like I felt sickened is what I felt like. I was, if you listened to the Patreon, you would have heard me feeling angry, I would say, on Wednesday.
Yeah,
Wednesday
John
I was
went
angry.
on a Gleeman level rant, I would say. I'm usually the ranty
right,
one.
Yeah. And that was just a reaction to, it became so apparent going to the game on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Where, with the feeling of what this could be in terms of a baseball town 51 weeks ago, right? 51 weeks ago, we knew we could feel what was there for the taking first week of October last year. And then to see this episode is focusing on the team and how they've played, right? And you're justifiably pointing out that the business decisions at the beginning have led to the way this team will be playing. I'm not even talking. My anger on Wednesday wasn't even about how the team was playing. It was about what those same business people making those same business decisions have done to a community in this city that I care about.
Right.
For 20 years, you and I have been out there evangelizing the beauty of baseball.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the beauty of the Twins. I'm saying the beauty of baseball as a thing to follow.
Yeah.
Right? Whether you want to focus on the numbers of it or the fun of it
or the beer and the weather of it.
Right, exactly.
And everything in between.
And everything in between. We have been
it's the beauty of it.
We've been evangelists for this for 20 some years.
Yeah.
And to be undercut like that,
well,
I feel that in some ways I feel the same probable anger that the players and front office and coaches do. Like,
in a
listen,
different way, but
we are doing what we can do here, and you guys are the fountainhead of this.
Right. And to see, I think I agree.
Why
completely.
are you cutting? Why are you doing this to yourselves?
Yes.
Let alone to this community.
I agree. And the fan apathy. We talked a lot more about this on the Patreon. I know you agree. Over 20 years of doing this, I think we have a pretty good track record of. I will never ever blame a fan base for having apathy or not buying tickets or not showing up, because you get, when you are a major league team or any product or business, you get what you deserve on that front. And like you said, you showed up at the first game of the homestand and you looked around, there were 12,000 people there or something like that for
maybe,
and your reaction was, this is pathetic, not because you're blaming the fans, but because the fans had every right not to show up, because of the actions of ownership, the front office, the players, the manager, everything rolled into one.
Starting from the off season all the way through to that year.
And so I agree with all that, and I think it's particularly damaging, and we again saw this coming when they announced the payroll was getting cut in November. We threw up our hands and we're like, are you kidding? This is the worst possible moment you could ever do this.
Right.
Because fan morale was in many ways the highest it has been in 20 years.
Right.
And I'm not saying they were ready to throw a parade. They won a best 2 out of 3 from Toronto, and they put up a small fight against Houston.
That's right.
It wasn't some big playoff run. But what it was breaking.
It was a start.
It was breaking the seal of 2 decades of a black playoff cloud hanging over the entire fan base and muting every level of regular season happiness or even off-season happiness, because this 0-for-18 hung over everything. And if nothing else, that series against the Blue Jays and the one Pablo win against Houston in Houston, which I was there for that. That was one of the great. I will remember that. His performance on the road against basically like one of the most successful teams of the last 30 years forever. The way Pablo went in and just shoved against a lineup full of Hall of Famers in enemy territory, I will never forget that as a playoff moment. And even more than that, I'll never forget sitting in that press box for the first win and then the series win against the Blue Jays and just kind of looking around at the euphoria, not only for what they had just accomplished, but the feeling that I think a lot of the sold-out crowd there had of, we can finally shut the F up. Internally and externally, about this 0-for-18, this blackout. We've at least shown it's possible. And the real reaction that you want to see from an ownership and a front office after that is, let's go. Let's put more money into this. Let's make better moves. Let's push more chips into the middle, because now we see what's possible. Now we see that this fan base is hyped.
That's right.
This morale is as high as it's been.
There is belief. There is faith. That's what struck me about the postseason last year, even before the wins, even just being in the stadium in Game 1 and Game 2 of that wild card, is how much belief there was in a franchise that had not done anything in the postseason in 20 years. And to feel that around you is uplifting, right?
And by the way, Baldelli and the players talked about that. I know, talking to Falvey and the front office guys, they felt it. And I certainly know that the poll ads were very happy, if only from a monetary standpoint, for what they watched at Target Field in October. And then to come off that and to have your then next decisions be, we're going to cut 20% off the payroll. We're going to make it so that the front office has a really difficult time building the type of quality veteran depth that they really prioritize, because they just have no resources to do that. We're not going to have any chance to re-sign guys we want to re-sign, whether it's Sonny Gray or whoever.
We've always had a front office that has gone big game hunting every offseason basically since they have been here, whether it was Nelson Cruz or Josh Donaldson or Carlos Correa or whatever, or trading for Sonny Gray.
And they thought they made a run at like Zach Wheeler or Yu Darvish. They weren't successful, but they were at least trying. And that's where this is also damaging, which we haven't talked a lot about, which is, Carlos Correa missed a lot of time with an injury, but I think it's clear even in the 10 games since he returned, he's got like 1,100 OP. He's one of the only guys performing here. And I don't think he's been perfect. He's made a couple of miscues here, but I mean, he got on base, 5 times yesterday? He hit a homer yesterday. And it should be clear that he's an incredible player. But his, $30-something million salary makes a lot less sense from like a flexibility or feasibility standpoint.
When it's a fourth of the payroll instead of when it's a fifth of the payroll.
Correct. And so that's also even Buxton's or Pablo Lopez's $20 million a year salary coming up here for the next 3 years. That's a perfectly reasonable salary for Pablo Lopez. But when your payroll 30 or 40 million lower than it was, that's like a free career that you've given up basically in there. And so I think that's part of it too. And so that's what I can't personally, that's what I can't get over. And I think it's funny that we sort of come to the same point, taking much different, because I always, and this I think is part of maybe why this show has worked over the years, or maybe our friendship has worked over the years.
Maybe, yeah.
Our acquaintanceship. I don't want to go.
Oh, no, go ahead. Our love affair. How about that?
Yeah. Because I certainly tend to look at sports or the Twins or whatever, and in part because look, at this point, if we're being honest, we both do this for a living.
Sure.
But I do it as my only job, and I have for 20-something years.
Right.
John had a real-life job and all that. He sort of stumbled into this a little bit. And so I'm always going to be focused more on the on-field performances and the roster building and the front office decision-making, transactions, that sort of thing. And I'm not saying John's not – I mean, we talk endlessly about that. But John's coming at it always – first and foremost from the things he just said, which is, just a experience standpoint, being at the ballpark, making friends, hosting events, drinking beer.
I would suggest community building.
Yeah. Right. I mean, John is truly, your name is the Twins Geek. You're the fan perspective.
Right. That's right.
And not that I'm not coming from, I'm a lifelong Twins fan. I'm not masking that. I never have. But I'm coming at it more so from at least a mix of the fan perspective and kind of a media perspective or a coverage perspective. Right. But it's interesting to me that
both of us
come to the same center.
Just no matter which one is our focus, it all comes back to the same source. Yeah.
Yes. And so that to me is the most disappointing aspect of this. You shed $30 million in payroll. You have the kind of whiff-filled offseason and trade deadline that the front office has, and then you just lay an egg on the field for 6 weeks. There's no circumstance in which that comes across as anything but horrible. But to have that coming off of last October and even last September, where they kind of were running away with the division by the end of September, and it was incredible vibes.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a disservice to the fans, which you tend to be focused on, to the team, which the roster, which I tend to be focused on. Yeah. And then here's the baffling part, and maybe we'll get into this in a second. It's such a disservice that they've done to themselves from a brand building and business standpoint. Right. And that is the part that is so stupid, I'm just going to say, because it is so penny wise and pound foolish or short-sighted to even think that by slashing $30 million in payroll when the morale was soaring, that you're even going to actually save $30 million. In reality, I would guess they'll never open their books, so we'll never know. I bet that slashing the $30 million in payroll ended up truly or will end up truly costing them not only this season in terms of revenue, because attendance was way down and all that, no playoff revenue, but I'm talking years out, because you've alienated fans and you've also put a barrier for entry for new fans, kids.
Yeah, I want to unpack
I bet
that.
they've lost several times that amount by quote unquote saving 30 million. You've lost 100 million or more than that, unseen millions. Right. And so that is the part that is so baffling to me. And I mean, it's just an all around horribleness. There's no aspect of this that's good. I think it is, we've talked about this a little bit more and more. We've gotten a lot of questions about this, obviously. I think it has certainly reached the point at which something has to occur because of this, in terms of, being everyone looks
some change.
I still remain. I tried my best the last couple of days to kind of ask around on this front at the ballpark. I remain skeptical that the heads rolling are going to be.
Let's dive into that.
Big heads, let's say, or satisfying to a fan base that has the pitchforks out righteously, I would say. I mean, that's subjective, obviously. I'm sure every fan has a different kind of baseline for what they would want that to be. I'm sure there are some fans who are like, I don't think anybody needs to be fired, because the truth is,
it was a total system failure.
Well, yes.
Yeah, right.
But if you said
Right.
you can point your one finger at one thing that deserves the majority of the blame, I would point it to the absolute very tip top of the organization, which is the ownership and upper management. And that is the one level that isn't going to be fired. Yeah, they're not going to fire themselves.
That's right. They're not going to sell the team.
And so,
Right.
the trickle down effect from there is, I think, but I do think I have more of a sense now that, at least in my mind, subjectively, there are going to be significant changes being made.
Okay.
That could mean coaching staff. That could mean front office staff. It's certainly, I would expect several big changes from a roster standpoint over the course of the offseason. But I still do not expect Falvey, Baldelli, that sort of thing. Or, I know people are talking about Dave St. Peter. I mean, please. I'm not saying these are not viable things to think should or could or would happen. I'm saying ain't going to happen. At least as far as I've deciphered. Now, this time of year, everyone's operating except for about 4 people in that whole organization, and even a couple of them might have some unclear information. And so
Right.
I can ask someone, what do you think's going on here? And they can give me their honest assessment or not. But they have imperfect information themselves. So, I mean, who knows? I wouldn't be shocked by any of this. But that's at least my sense now with 3 games.
That's right. Well, we'll see what happens with the post-mortem next week. We've got 3 games left.
Yeah.
It's going to be gorgeous weather. I'm going to spend part of that weather on Brixworth's deck.
Yeah,
before the
great,
game.
One of the great outdoor patios or decks.
That's right.
Right in the North Loop. Even for me, it's within walking distance to Target Field. I can limp my way over there.
That's right. I think Sunday afternoon, where we get a Vikings game or something, Vikings Packers game on the road,
and links at night too.
Yeah, they've got TVs everywhere in Brixworth. They also have the outdoor patio. They've also got the incredible pizza. They apparently have incredible wings that I haven't really dug into.
I had the
yet.
burger there,
and they've got hazy IPAs and or beers and stuff that are related to Blackstack.
Yes.
And in
Their
fact,
sister,
they do a lot. Yeah, they're kind of the sister organization of
Brixworth. It's in the old Derby spot.
Yeah.
What was it? 3 blocks from Target Field?
Oh, not even that. Block and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great pregame and postgame spot. Also a great off-season spot.
Right,
to just go have dinner or have a beer or whatever.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Detroit-style pizza, good beers. I can vouch for the burgers. I have friends who can vouch for the wings. So, yeah, Brixworth, you can just Google Brixworth, Bricks, Worth. Follow signs.
WORTH.
Yeah.
Worth part.
We got smart listeners. They can figure that out.
Okay, yeah.
And then there's always I like their little cute sign that says like patios around the corner.
Yeah, you got to when you get there, you kind of got to go around the back of the building, but you'll see the big sign. They'll take you there, or you can join them at their great Burnsville location to watch the games on TV. Brixworth, a great place to go.
I had several people. People have been very nice this homestand. Walking by the press box. And, I think there's a feeling like kind of last day of school vibe where it's like, hey, I'll see you. It was nice knowing you, that sort of thing. A lot of people have been very complimentary about the podcast and about me and about you and about the Athletic and stuff like that. But about 2 years ago, we joked on here that...
we joked on the Patreon.
Yes, that Patreon subscribers... as our elite crew, as they are, when they walk by the press box or they run across John in line for beer.
If they want a code word to tell us that they're Patreon subscribers.
Hey, nice hair.
That's right.
Because neither of us have nice hair, if we're being honest. And so today's sponsor, which is Hims, which is something that could potentially help you grow back or
some
improve
nice hair.
Your hair.
That
if
is
you also
correct.
have, ironically, as we do, nice hair.
That's right. Listen, they provide and it's not just like one thing. They've got a whole range of hair loss treatments that work, all from, basically the comfort of your couch. You can just go on there and check these out. They make hair loss simple with doctor-trusted treatment options, clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow the hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. You could be a whole different kind of hair in about 3 to 6 months. All you have to do is you just start your free online visit today at hims.com. hims.com, that's hims.com/Gleeman, that's hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/Gleeman. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information.
Okay. I also I want to say this too. Like there's more rants to come, but I did want to say on that note that
on the hair loss note, or
no,
on the firing.
Although
people
I am
note?
always thinking about that. But
On the firing people.
I literally.
Do you want to fire some people with hair loss? Is that what you're saying?
You know what's funny? The Twins translator or interpreter, excuse me,
right.
slash I guess
PR.
part of the communications department.
Sure.
Mauricio Ortiz,
Right.
great guy,
Yes.
young kid,
Great hair.
Yes. We were standing around pregame waiting for whatever, and I said to him, you're a great guy. I've become friends with Mauricio. He's a young kid getting started in the business. Super nice, super helpful, super competent, all this stuff. The players like him. We like him, whatever. I said, I come in here every day, sweaty, balding, and you're always so friendly, and you're like, hey, how's it going? And I look at him because he had gotten a haircut.
Okay.
And he's got this great,
He's got great
like
hair.
almost 80s style flowing.
Of course.
And it makes me mad a little bit. And I said, it almost makes me not want to like you, but you're so likable.
Is that what you do with Doe as well?
Yeah, and Phil. Just anybody who's got a half.
Phil too, yeah.
Half decent.
You're right.
Phil's 200 years old. He's got the greatest head of hair I ever saw.
The beat writers have good hair.
Except for
That's what I'm saying. Except for you. You're bringing down the average, no question.
Well, in a lot of things I do that.
That's right.
Or I bring up the average weight.
That's why I should probably come to the press box more often, is to make you look that much better.
I bring down the average hair quality and bring up the average weight. So it really works well for the overall group.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I wanted to say was, excuse me, I got sidetracked. Hair talk. What I really wanted to say was,
You want to fire Mauricio now?
no. I want to promote him so I don't have to look at his hair every day. I really have appreciated. We talk about this every year at the end of the season. I know it's not the end of the season, but it's been such a difficult stretch here that it would be very easy for us or the fan base to become so frustrated that you kind of lash out, or people stop listening to our show, which I would understand, whatever.
Right.
But we have heard from so many people, and just we can see the numbers of downloads and subscribers and all that too. And I've also just heard from so many people who've swung by the press box and said hello and said so many nice things, even in the worst games they've ever been to, And I know you hear the same, and we get a lot of emails from people and stuff. And it's just such a wonderful. It's great in a season like last year where everything's going well and there's a euphoria that's shared as a community. That feels good to have people say they appreciate what we're doing and it's fun, and it adds to the fun they're having. But the flip side is, it feels similar to me when people say, you guys have been a distraction from the negativity, or you guys have added some gallows humor to it, or you guys have at least kind of made it more bearable, at least on some level. And I almost feel like that's even more valuable in a way.
Yeah.
So I'm so...
A tribe comes together when the suffering is there.
Right.
Really,
and if
that's right.
caused someone to be 1% less miserable about this second half fade, mission accomplished from my standpoint. And so we've heard from so many wonderful people and stuff like that. And I just want to say thank you for that.
I appreciate
it. We appreciate it. And I know that this isn't, this is obviously a rough season on the field. We don't want to be talking for months on end about payroll and television blackouts and that crap. We want to be talking about fun trades and big free agent signings and winning streaks and playoff positioning and debates about the third starter for the playoffs. That's the stuff that's fun to talk about. All this other stuff is a necessity to talk about because unfortunately it's become a necessity by their actions.
Sure.
And I will say,
we should mention in the off season we are going to be continuing to do free podcasts. Maybe only 2 or 3 per month, not necessarily every week.
We dial back a little bit. So if you want those, including we'll have some guests on to talk. Yes. We'll do some more like roster breakdowns, free agency and trade stuff, payroll stuff, all that. It'll be largely on the Patreon side, which is patreon.com/Gleeman, patreon.com/Gleeman. We would love to have you join us. It'll cost you a couple bucks a month basically throughout the off season. But in addition to the ugliness that we've seen on the field and the negativity and stuff, I know for me personally, I've talked about this probably more on the Patreon side, but from a physical standpoint, this has been the worst year of my life by far.
Okay.
And I haven't been exactly a picture of health over the years, but I have essentially been waiting and putting off back and spinal surgeries until the Twins were done, just because I wanted to make sure that there were no playoff travel involved and all that. And so now I'm unfortunately going to have to put that in motion and have that. And so that has added to kind of my misery of just watching this and sitting. I'm just uncomfortable at times. I can't walk a lot of the times.
Including
and stuff like that.
them being a pain in the neck is only part of the pain. Sure.
And so, but I just wanted to say that, like, the baseball team hasn't been fun for a long time for me. Basically, since spring training, I've been sort of miserable, even by my standards, just physically. But, you know, hearing from people who have enjoyed our work and have been very supportive of us and are just very kind to us in general has really kind of been uplifting to me. And also, we say this every year, but like, this podcast has become something much more than you and I ever could have fathomed.
Absolutely.
Both in terms of like the audience and that we can make it sort of part of our job and we can do this for a living, but also just the reaction we've got from it. And there are certainly days where John and I sit at this table and we are like,
I do not want to talk about this team.
Right. And I'm sure there are days that John thinks, I don't want to talk to Gleeman.
That's true.
But I think for the most part, we're still having a good time doing this.
That's true.
And that is in part because of our differences and similarities, our good mix, you and I. But I think so much of it is just the community around it, as you've talked about, or the audience, however you want to view it. And so I do want to not lose sight of that in the negativity surrounding the team and the front office and the ownership. I could not feel better about the people who listen to the podcast, who read The Athletic, who read Twins Daily, who send us nice emails, who run into us.
Who ask us questions for the mailbag. That's where I think I feel it almost the most. We throughout the Patreon side, if you're not one of the Patreon listeners, probably at least twice a month we end up doing a mailbag where we get literally well over 100 to 200 questions about this team. And that's when you kind of get a sense of, oh yeah, people are paying attention. People care about the minutia. People have got
and what I really like about the mailbag,
people want to get deeper and deeper into this, right?
Is that they take us in directions we would never go ourselves.
True,
But then the other thing I like about the mailbag is like they've almost become a third character on the show.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they can drive the conversation, and also there's like so many, like we talked about the nice hair thing. There's 50 different running bits that we have because of that.
That's
And so it really is sort of heartwarming. And I'm not one of these guys who talks like this all the time. Believe me, I'm a robot usually. And so it does mean a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to John, and it means a lot to us collectively. So I just wanted to say a genuine thank you in the midst of this terribleness for all of that.
I agree. I couldn't feel more gratitude about the thing. I will just tell everybody, continue to reach out. You know, I mean,
to John, not me. I'm done. I got enough compliments.
If you are somebody who, feels like, I like being a part of this community and I want to further engage myself in this community, always reach out. We are happy to be a gathering pole for a community of Twins fans in this state.
Okay, we're going to talk about specific players momentarily because I do think I kind of ranted about this on the Patreon on a couple days ago, but I do think it's important to not let the anger and the righteous criticism of the front office and ownership, or even the coaching staff for that matter, kind of shield what have been some just absolutely abysmal performances from the players on the field. And they are ultimately the ones winning and losing games.
Right.
You can talk about all you want about payroll and bad moves, but the truth is they were put into a spot now where to kind of keep their window open even slightly, all they had to do was win games against the worst team in the National League at home, by the way.
Right. Or I mean, I would suggest for over the last 6 weeks, they've had multiple opportunities to turn this around, whether it was the Angels or the Reds or the Boston Red Sox or the Florida Marlins.
But this one really stands out, which is you have a 100-loss Marlins team where I do this for a living, and there were a lot of guys in that lineup and that bullpen I've never heard of in my life. And to lose 2 out of 3 in the fashion they did, I mean, that's just players playing poorly and not executing and, popping up bunts and dropping balls and throwing balls away and running into outs and
not moving a runner
all
over,
that stuff. And so I don't want that there's plenty of blame to be spread around. I don't think it has to be one or the other. And I think in a weird way, the players have sort of gotten off. Yeah, in a weird way.
Yeah, right.
And so we're going to talk about that in a moment. But just to wrap up a couple of these thoughts on the bigger picture side of things. We have heard since the payroll cuts in November became not official, but known, from so many people that are like, well, if they're not going to support their product, why am I going to support their product? Absolutely. I agree. You're not going to find any of these things I'm about to say I don't disagree with on any level. Because ultimately, baseball is an entertainment product. They have a brand and they have a product, and they're trying to get people to enjoy and purchase that product. And I always compare it to a restaurant. If you got a neighborhood restaurant, you've been going there for 30 years, you're emotionally attached to that restaurant. But if you notice the quality slipping at that restaurant, if they're not, the wallpaper's peeling and they're not washing the dishes and the carpet's dirty and the food ingredients are clearly worse, no matter what your emotional attachment is, I think it is absolutely a perfectly reasonable reaction to go, this sucks, but I don't want to eat here anymore. I don't want to pay money to eat here anymore.
Yeah.
And so
I'm not going to get the same experience of this one way or the other.
Right.
Whether I come here or not, whether this business survives or not, it's not the same thing.
I largely view the Twins as just a very amplified version of that. And sports have an emotional attachment to the fan base, unlike a normal business. And so you're still going to get diehard Twins fans, but that's what makes it so painful. It's not as easy as just saying, this restaurant stinks now, I'm going to stop going there. It's much harder for people to do that. And we can speak from experience on that front.
Let me pile on that for an additional point, which we talked a little bit about this on Wednesday's Patreon, and I meant to bring up a point, and I didn't. But fortunately, speaking of communities, a couple people brought it up in the comments. To continue with your analogy, there's a lot of good restaurants going up right now.
True, yeah.
You know what I mean? There are some franchises here who are consistently investing in that franchise, right? We are seeing it.
By the way, their young, high potential players
that is right.
are living up to that hype,
right.
whereas that has not always been the case.
I mean, the Wolves were the laughing stock of the NBA for about 30 years, right? And they are now, it's not totally clear the ownership change that has happened there is going to go through, or how that's going to work.
Money.
But the point is that new ownership, new management, and ownership that kind of came in there decided we're going to start investing in this thing.
Yes,
right?
and
We're going to be aggressive in investing in new management and a bunch of other things. Right?
High upside young player Anthony Edwards is ascending to superstardom. Lynx, same thing.
And what you have seen is a community. A passionate community, which was, essentially kind of hidden in the corner, because how can you be passionate about a team that's been brutal for, mostly since it started?
Believe me,
right?
You will find no bigger lifelong Wolves fan than me.
Right.
And I have waded through, miles of S as a Wolves fan.
A block away from Target Field, they're seeing exactly the opposite, and it's because they invested in that particular part, right? And in fact, you can see it a little bit with the Wild. You can see it a little with the Wolves. You can see it with the Lynx. You can see it with a lot of different organizations in this town. And in fact, I would even argue that you can see it with the Twins and what they did up until this year.
Right.
That by making changes and by investing and by continuing to throw an extra $10 million in there.
This is worse because they showed what's possible when you take the opposite tack.
And investing in their organization, investing in the analytics, investing in the IT, investing in the scouting, investing in all of those, in the minor league development, investing in all of those areas.
And also just making some big swings like you talked about in trades and
exactly right. Yes,
for them at least, by their standards.
Right. That you can see that. And when you decide you're going to go exactly the opposite way of that, and you are surrounded by other teams that are not
by other good restaurants.
This is the 16th biggest metro area in the United States. Still supports five professional men's sports team, a WNBA team, a Gopher football team, a Gopher basketball team, a Gopher hockey team. There is so much competition for sports dollars and sports interest and sports mind bandwidth, for the fan base in this thing. And you've you decided you just didn't need that, or you said, no, listen, for the price of an extra $20 million or $30 million this year, which, by the way, as you pointed out, they're probably not getting that $30 million. Like they may have actually lost money on that.
Do you know how much $30 million is?
You sacrificed all of it.
You could lose $30 million 300 seasons in a row and still not get to $1 billion in losses. And the Twins' ownership, that's $900 million.
30 seasons.
Oh, yeah. You're right. 300 seasons. I meant to say that.
Okay,
Nobody's going to live 300 seasons, so wouldn't have said that. But 30 seasons at $30 million. And by the way, you still won't get to even a fraction of that family's overall wealth. But then here's the other thing.
Part of the franchise's
correct.
Value. Right.
And here's the other thing. They bought Carl Pohlad, their grandfather now of the generation that's doing this, basically. Third removed, kind of. Bought the Twins for $30-40 million.
Yeah, right.
And they're worth
somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion.
I would guess probably $2 billion.
Right.
In part because they have a publicly financed ballpark that's pretty valuable.
Right. That's right.
And so even if you lost $30 million a season.
So they've essentially made $50 million a year on that purchase. Right.
And I think so many people view a baseball team,
at least 40.
I would think it should be a lot more rare, but I'm always surprised by the number of people who are willing to stand up and fight on behalf of billionaires. I never quite understood it, but it's always prevalent. We see it with a lot more famous billionaires who are doing that now, in all walks of life. You can probably picture in your head various people I could be talking about. But the excuse with baseball that the defenders of owners always make are, well, you can't spend other people's money. But as we've pointed out, 30 million, 50 million, 100 million, it means almost literally nothing to billionaires. It's like getting worked up over $30 for a normal person. And then the other thing is, well, they're just operating it like a business. Well, first of all, you can operate like a business and do a bad job of it. Mm-hmm. Plenty of businesses do that. By the way, the Pohlads have owned plenty of other businesses that they've done such a bad job that they folded and lost millions of dollars with. Sure. But also, who says you got to operate a baseball team as a business? It's a luxury item. It's a painting or a yacht or, fill in the blank. It is something that is appreciating tenfold, 20-fold, 50-fold over decades to the point that a $40 million investment, 40 years ago, is now worth $2 billion. And they have such unfathomable wealth. And good for them. I mean, great. I would love to have that too. I'm not saying it's
right.
But I don't think people, the average fan, or especially the people who tend to kind of stick up for billionaires and make these arguments, it's just a business, blah, blah, blah. I don't think people quite realize what it would take to truly make a financial dent that would be felt by the billionaire owners of a baseball team. And $30 million or $50 million or $100 million is so far from that, from affecting their actual wallet.
Right.
The only way it can affect them in the way that fans are hoping, because I know fans have said to us, well, how can we're going to boycott the team. I'm not going to spend another dollar on the team. We can see it in the attendance. I'm not going to go. It's only going to be worse next year. I don't watch anymore. We've heard from many people who their only link to the Twins now is this podcast, which again goes back to, I do appreciate that. It makes me feel good in a way. But that's a righteous action to take. Like we said, if you've been going to a restaurant and you love that restaurant and it starts to go downhill, you stop going there as much. But whereas your business being removed from the bottom line of that restaurant will be felt most likely by the owners of that restaurant, they're not feeling even a $300,000 shortfall in terms of projected attendance. That's a lot of money that they were expecting to get and that they caused to not get to that point. That's a lot of millions of dollars. They don't feel that. It has no impact on them. The only way, so I hear from so many people who are like, I'm going to stop spending money on the Twins. Yeah, I get it, rightfully. But I don't think that's going to have the effect that they would like it to have, because the normal kind of A, B, C logic of that is so warped by the level of wealth involved that you cannot get to that wallet to hurt it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep, I get it.
And the only way that you can affect the type of change that fans would like to happen from kind of a boycott or a, ticketing going down and all that is on an emotional level. That's the only way you can reach multi-billionaires in this circumstance. I'm not saying they don't care about money. They clearly do. We've seen it in their actions. But I'm saying fans do not have the ability to cause them to take such a hit monetarily that their reaction would be, oh my God, we got to go in the other direction, start spending. We got to get these fans back. The only way you can affect that type of change in this circumstance is emotionally. And I don't know that exists.
Yeah,
I know that the poll ads, and I've spoken to them, I've spoken to their longtime employees, everyone loves to say, hey, they care. They really care. And I do believe that on some level. Obviously, they care. They go to a lot of games. Some owners are checked out.
They also have their priorities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I always say that is, you can tell me something is true, or you can show me something is true. And at some point, if you do not show me consistently that what you're saying is true, I don't care that you keep saying it's true.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
And you can tell me on an emotional level, they care. They're hurt by this season. They're disappointed and they're frustrated. I have no doubt that's true. That they're going to see the attendance and they're going to see the revenue and they're going to be hurt by it. But my point to that is, and I've said this to people who don't like hearing this, my point to that is, okay, they care and they're frustrated and they're disappointed and they see the bottom line and they know that attendance cratered and is only going to get worse next year. They didn't get playoff revenue, all this stuff.
Do something about it.
Do something about it.
Right.
And what I fear is the something that they're going to ultimately do about it is lower payroll even further.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. They've got to show something. Let's talk about our last sponsor, BetterHelp. I know we just talked about how much we enjoy being a community and helping people with the therapy of dealing with the Twins and the Twins' losses, but you might have some more. You might have some more serious stuff to deal with, and it's hard to get to the point where you are ready to talk to somebody about some deeply personal stuff that you yourself might be having trouble facing.
Yes, and what we talk about when they're a sponsor. And when we read a sponsor for BetterHelp, something we talk about is if you wake up one morning and you decide, I would like to get some help, a lot of times that might be the only morning you wake up feeling that way all year.
That's right.
And so there should be no barriers for entry for that, ideally. Because anything that kind of bumps you off that path, you might not wake up feeling that same way the next morning. And so the beauty of BetterHelp is compared to having to go to a physical doctor or make a phone call or set something up, they can typically line you up with a real licensed therapist who can help you with specific problems within days rather than weeks.
Right.
And then the other thing I like is they can tailor it to what you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video call, you can do a video call. If you don't want to be on camera, you can do a phone call. If you're like me and you hate talking on the phone, you can just type in a live chat to them. They'll set it up, whatever you're comfortable with.
And whatever your schedule looks like. Whatever you need to do, they can help you figure out. All you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire, and you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge if it's not working for you. So
rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Gleeman, and you will get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP, betterhelp.com/Gleeman. So I guess I sort of proved my own point in a weird way, where I was saying that all these bigger picture or business side issues kind of shield the players. And so here we are now.
We're getting to that at the end.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
We're now going to talk about some of these players' performances. Now, we talked about at the beginning a little bit about the last night and everything. But at the end, so I suppose I'm proving my own point, which is one way to be correct, is to prove your own point. So I do like that. It's a good stance to take.
That's right.
But let's talk a little bit about
Make
this.
the same mistake you were trying to call
and then
out.
You just go, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they didn't talk about the players till the end. Now, it was our podcast, but, whatever. But, okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. So I mentioned the comments earlier in the homestand where first Baldelli called them out in more, kind of muted terms, where he was like, I'm not happy with the offensive execution. I feel like we're providing good game plans and coaching, but it's not being sort of brought into games, synced up with what we're seeing in games. And then Correa, moments after that, in the clubhouse when we talked to him, he not only agreed with that, but then kind of built on it in a more specific or pointed way and said, there are some young guys here who just kind of haven't learned what it means to be a big leaguer for a 6-month season.
Right.
And they need to put in more work behind the scenes. They need to be more focused, all that sort of stuff. And there's been different reactions to that. What I thought was interesting was then the next day, which was yesterday, Baldelli was asked not about his own comments, but about Correa's kind of more strongly worded version of his comments. And he was aware of them. He had read it. And probably on The Athletic. He did tell me the other day he's an Athletic subscriber. Or maybe he just went to France 44 and the guy behind the counter.
Yeah, the people who are not part of the Patreon will not get that reference, but you'll have to join Patreon to get this hidden joke. All right.
Yes. We got a Gleeman disciples everywhere. They're making sandwiches. They got everything.
That's right.
Although if you are that Gleeman disciple who works at France 44, hook it up. Let's go.
We like sandwiches.
Me and John will show up and eat a sandwich for free anytime.
Right. Yeah.
But so I think his exact wording when asked, what is your reaction to Correa's comments the previous day, where he didn't call anybody out by name.
Right.
And he wasn't like mean-spirited about it. He just said, if you want to have a long, beautiful career in this game, there are certain things you need to do as a professional. And we're not seeing that consistently enough.
Right.
So the next day, Baldelli said, I saw it. I read it. He wasn't off base one bit on any level. So he's sort of putting his stamp on that as well. So that brings me then to the individual performances.
And that's interesting to me too, in that Baldelli was a veteran. Baldelli was somebody who was a player not that long ago. It was 10, 15 years ago.
Sure, but
right?
he was a phenom prospect initially.
Right.
He was in the majors at 21.
Right.
I think people lose sight of one of the great athletes of that era, about 15, 20 years ago, whatever. A top 10 consensus prospect. I think he was third for Rookie of the Year, and health problems stopped him from becoming the star that many people thought.
Right.
But then late in his career, he became sort of the veteran role player bench type of guy.
Right.
So he's seen both sides of it, certainly. And so one of the criticisms that I've seen where people reacted as if Correa was like almost throwing people under the bus, which I think is overly dramatic. But first of all, I think they're only expressing the exact sentiments that us and anybody else who's watched this would have. But I think for some reason when people that close express it, fans go, well, wait a minute, I can say that, but I didn't want him to say that.
Right.
And the other criticism I've heard is, well, it's not just the young players. Well, he didn't say it was just the young players, but it's a lot easier to address this.
What he said was, there are some of us who are trying to do extra work, and there's some people who aren't, and they tend to be the younger players.
Correct. And part of it is because some of these young players have undeniable potential to be great.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And you want to kind of get to them early and get them to realize you have to put in this work to reach that potential. Right. With some 35-year-old guy who's struggling, first of all, he might just be struggling because he's old, and also this might be the end. If he hasn't gotten it by now, it's too late to get it.
Adrian Beltre might have been saying the same thing about some of the Astros back in the day.
Carlos Beltre.
I'm sorry, Carlos Beltre.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm sure.
Adrian Beltre.
So that brings me to some of the player stuff. So, he intentionally didn't say names, which I think is a good thing.
Sure.
And that wasn't really the vibe I got. It wasn't as if he was pointing to a guy and saying, that guy's screwing up. He wasn't saying that.
Right.
It was more from we're trying to get through what it means to live up to your hype and have the career you are capable of.
And while you can take a look at sort of the overall numbers on this lineup and say, this team, and say, hey, this is a fairly old team, but
there are a handful of not rookie, but like second and third year, 24, 25, 26-year-old guys who were in last season were huge contributors, or at the very least were being
in the middle of this season.
Right. And were being viewed as kind of building block core pieces to the lineup.
Yeah.
And again, we're reading between the lines here, and I don't mean to call out when Correa was not himself calling out. But I think in my mind, if you're looking at who are young / inexperienced hitters, and that eliminates half the group already.
Right.
And then guys who are performing poorly during this 6-week stretch. Well, that also eliminates guys like Wallner or Larnach, and obviously Carlos Santana is not in that group, and some of these other guys. But there's really, to me, it can only be 4 names that he's talking about. And I'm not trying to speak for Carlos Correa, but just logically, he has to be talking about one or some of Royce Lewis, Jose Miranda, Edward Julian, and Brooks Lee. Right. It has to be. Right. And if you look at the performances of those players since August 18th, so while they've gone 12-24, here are some numbers to chew on. Royce Lewis has been healthy enough to play for that entire time.
Right.
That's a distinction that's probably worth making in some of these cases. He has batted 198 with 1 homer over the course of 6 weeks.
Yep.
Okay. Jose Miranda, over that same span, again, healthy enough to play. I don't know that he's healthy. He missed yesterday's game with a sore lower back. He was scratched from the lineup, by the way. He has hit 202 with 0 homers over those 6 weeks. Yep. Brooks Lee.
I'm not sure how many extra base hits he's
No, the power is just completely honest. Brooks Lee, who I will note is a literal rookie who was called up 2 months ago or whatever. So
and also had a pretty good game last night.
And has also, has also been injured.
Right.
He was injured in spring training with a back problem. He went on the IL a month ago with a shoulder injury. He is hitting, over that 6-week span, 158.
Yeah.
And that's with a 5 RBI game and a good game last night, boosting those numbers to 158.
That's after last night.
Yes, these are all updated numbers. Okay. Eddie Julian, who essentially got put back, he played his way to AAA midseason to a demotion, got brought back and put in the lineup because of all the injuries, and then played his way out of the lineup a second time of late.
To the point where
he's just
facing right-handed batters last night. He was not an option off the bench.
He has, over that 6-week span, batted 208 with 1 homer. Now, there are other guys who have struggled. Like the catchers have had 0 production. Manny Margot has not hit. I mean, there's tons of guys who have struggled.
Yep.
But those 4 guys are not only 4 guys that...
Willie Castro struggled.
Sure. I mean, more often than not, they've struggled.
Yep.
Which is why guys like Larnach and Wallner and Correa are standout because they've played well. And I know also that people have an issue with a guy who missed 2 months coming back for a week.
Sure.
And then calling out other people. And I get that. It's a very weird situation to be in.
Everybody admits it's been a total system meltdown.
But if we need to pretend as if Carlos Correa is not a voice to be listened to when it comes to professionalism, an approach at the plate, production, putting in work, I mean, you've lost the plot if you don't think that Carlos Correa is that near the top of
and if you don't think, by the way, that he has expressed this behind the scenes several times before this.
Yes.
And so you don't understand how he works.
But those 4 guys, Royce Lewis, Jose Miranda, Brooks Lee, and Eddie Julian, are last year, with 3 of them, not Brooks Lee, who's a rookie, this year and going forward, are essential pieces of any success the Twins are going to have offensively. Yep. And so for all 4 of them to basically hit collectively, 190 with 3 homers and a 5-something OPS, terrible. Just not even bad, just terrible performances.
All from mostly from the middle of the lineup. You know what I mean?
True.
What was so optimistic about this group in middle of July was those guys were clicking.
Yes.
Right? When the Astros come to town and Correa can't play because he's got this plantar fasciitis thing that's popped up out of nowhere. You've got Miranda on a 14 straight hit streak. You've got Royce Lewis hitting the hell out of the ball. You got Brooks Lee immediately making an impact.
Right. And then that just completely dries up.
Right.
And so I don't think it's a moral failing on them that they're struggling. But if the notion that at least Correa and Baldelli have, and those would certainly be among the 2 most trusted voices on this topic that I would have, feel that they're not putting in the work necessary over the course of a 162-game, 6-month marathon grind of a season, both from a preparation standpoint, from a just work standpoint, from a health and physical standpoint.
I'll even say just even from an emotional standpoint, just dealing with the fact that, okay, I stink, and the whole team's going downhill, and I just want this season to be over just like everybody else. Right?
When I say I don't think it's a moral failing, it's something that if they don't make strides to correct it, it can become that. But what I mean is this is part of the learning curve for a young player. They haven't been through this grind before. Yeah. Some of them are banged up. Some of them have never struggled like this before. Royce Lewis had only experienced success in the majors until about 2 months ago. And he also hadn't played this deep into a season because he'd been injured so much. And so maybe he's wearing down physically. Maybe pitchers are making adjustments and he's realizing or not realizing, oh, I have to adjust back or I'm going to get sliced up here. Or maybe some of the criticisms that Correa and Baldelli have are applicable here for him and other players.
Yep.
But those four guys, in addition to some of the veterans, have really made it impossible for this lineup to consistently be productive because, as you said, these are core middle of the lineup pieces that haven't just struggled, they've just gone missing, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so
these are 500 OPS guys right now. Right?
Yeah, instead of being 850 OPS.
Right.
I mean, they're just
900 OPS. Right.
Beyond that, though, and Correa, this is what makes it weird for Correa or difficult for Correa to be speaking up when in that 6-week free fall, he's been there for a week.
Yeah, right.
He's been injured for 5 of that. Same thing with Buxton.
Right.
Those 2 absences killed them in a lot of ways. I'll also say Joe Ryan has missed that entire time. That's been huge. Brock Stewart has missed that entire time. That's been huge. Huge for the rotation with Ryan, huge for the bullpen with Brock Stewart, huge for the lineup with Correa and Buxton, and I'll toss in Kepler for that matter.
Chris
who hasn't
Paddock
seemed right physically. Chris Paddock, I'll say
and I mean, you can say, well, Chris Paddock wasn't that big of a contributor. Yeah, but because Chris Paddock is missing, because DeSclafani is missing, because Ryan's missing, you can't have Varland in the bullpen because you're going to keep Varland sitting in there. Like,
and you're also getting shorter starts from rookies.
Right, of course.
Putting more weight on the bullpen.
Right.
The bullpen's missing Brock Stewart, and it's just.
I mean, a lot of what you think about this team going forward has to do with how optimistic you want to be about a lot of the young arms that they filled in here, which looked good, but looked good in limited times, and were also part of the problem in some ways. Like I don't want to be piling on these guys, but the fact that we're getting 4 inning starts and we've got a thin bullpen is in fact part of it.
But that was the fear, by the way, with any young pitchers as they get later in the season. They're going to wear down.
Yeah, I'm not beating up these guys or saying they don't have a future. What I'm saying is, how do you project 2025? How do you look at 2025? In July, I had a tremendous amount of confidence about not just about the rest of the season, but around 2025, 2026, 2027, as I saw a young core handling themselves in the middle of a lineup and seeing a young pitching come up and, not thrive, but you hold things together for 4 or 5 innings. If you hold
your own as a rookie or a sophomore or even a junior in the majors, it's so easy to then dream on or project out or extrapolate. Oh, 3 years from now, this guy's going to be amazing. Or next year, this guy's going to be amazing. And that can still be true. I'm not trying to rule that out with individuals or collectively. But I think the point that Baldelli and Correa would make and have made is that doesn't just automatically happen. You have to work towards fixing those things or making it more likely that those good things can happen. And so, but here, I'll also then add
go ahead.
On some of the veteran front, during this 6-week fade, Duran is 0-4 with a 5.40 ERA. Zebby Matthews has a 6-something ERA, like you talked about.
Yeah.
Simeon Woods Richardson clearly has run out of gas.
Oh, my God. Well, how was he throwing 90 miles an hour?
I mean, they gave him such a quick hook. You could see they were just like...
he does not have
Alcala got sent back to the minors because he had an 8 ERA. These guys were all contributing. Bailey Ober is 0-3 with a 5.45 ERA, and the killer, I thought, that is going to be kind of overlooked here because they've been so good overall this season and in past seasons is in one turn through the rotation with kind of your backs against the wall with every game having huge importance to just keep your playoff light flickering.
Yeah.
Lopez and Bailey Ober, they're only 2 veteran starters who have been so good for so long for them.
Yeah.
Both laid eggs. And I thought that was just hugely damaging because it, like we were talking earlier, this free fall, they never kind of stopped it for any moment. I felt like those guys were their only chance to come up for air.
Yep.
And they couldn't do it. And so then you just started to keep...
Last night, as the game was progressing, and I was kind of hoping they might still win it, I was thinking about the worst loss of the season. And the one I kept coming back to a couple of different ones, and they were all games that either Ober or Lopez started. And, I think one of the worst losses of the season, the one I could not shake was Sunday's start versus the Red Sox, where I was like,
where Lopez, by the way,
they felt like they had some real momentum. They were actually a half game up on everybody.
Yes. And Lopez had been phenomenal over the previous 2 months. He had a 1-something ERA since the All-Star break, and he gives up 7 runs, including a pair of 3-run homers to the same guy. and that game's just over. And, Ober's had a couple of blow-ups. This most recent one was by no means a blow-up, but given how much the offense is struggling because of all these guys we've just been talking about, allowing 4 runs in the second inning deflated the whole thing. Whatever air they had left was gone at that point. And so these are the type of things I'm talking about when I say, yes, the payroll cuts and the lack of spending, limited options, and then whiffing on those had huge impacts. And I'm willing to hear arguments that those are the number one and number two things that blame should be pointed at. I might even make that argument.
Sure.
But I think to allow that to take away from some of these horrendous fades by players, and not just players, veteran players, rookie, promising young players, core pieces, the stars that you're going to lean on, and then also on an injury front.
Yeah.
Correa's guilty of it. Buxton's guilty of it. It's not a moral failing. Joe Ryan, Brock Stewart, Kepler, Alcala, Paddock, on and on and on.
Yeah.
You add all this stuff together, and I'm not saying I got to get rid of all these guys. All I'm saying is there is so much blame to go around here that I would encourage people. I know this sounds absurd. I would encourage people to truly spread it as much as they can because there's so much to go here. And I don't think
nobody's safe, but also it's hard to find anybody who is
right.
But the danger in focusing too much on this versus that is that you're not understanding you're not seeing the whole picture.
Right.
You're letting other folks off. You're letting people off the hook by focusing too much on this particular area.
If you're a great player,
you're also letting too many people off the hook by spreading it too thin. By the way,
sure.
So.
If you're a great player and you just spent 6 weeks hitting 190, and you start looking around on Twitter or you're reading whatever, and you're like, man, everyone's just mad at the poll ads.
Right,
this is great. I mean, they don't want to lose games, but nobody's even looking in my direction.
Well, just so we're clear, that is also one of the dangers of doing things like cutting payroll of $30 million is you do provide cover for everybody that, in the same way, one of the things I've said is, plenty of organizations are like, okay, yeah, we're going to tank. We're going to tank. Well, okay, but you can tank to the rest of the world and get your draft picks or get whatever you want to. Internally, you still got to hold people accountable.
Right.
Because when you tank, you're providing cover for everybody to do a horseshit job.
Oh my God, John Swart.
Right?
I agree. And by the way, I'll go back to the trade deadline where several players were on record as saying they needed help at the trade deadline, including Correa, who went as far as to say that he submitted a list of recommended targets they go after.
Right.
And then, of course, they all, and by the way, off the record, many more players spoke openly about, we need some help. Like, they didn't do it during the offseason. Let's see them do it now. And so I felt that was deflating, if only for an emotional standpoint. I'm not saying that led to all these guys playing poorly, but it didn't help.
But it also didn't mean that they didn't need those reinforcements. Like some of these guys might have been able to be benched.
Yes. And and we'll shut up here, but it also can just be boiled down to this. They're going to end up missing the playoffs by like 2 or 3 games, probably, depending on what happens this weekend. I don't care where you think the blame shouldn't go, what percentage of it needs to be pointed where or what. I don't care if you're a billionaire and you stick up for billionaires or you're on a minimum salary job and you stick up for billionaires. I don't care if you want the manager fired, all the players traded, whatever. The thing I think we could probably all agree on is that when a team misses the playoffs by like 2 games in a 162-game season, being able to spend another $30 million or even another $5 million at midseason at the trade deadline probably could have won them 2 more games. I think everyone should be able to agree with that.
Listen, I would suggest you can look any place you want in the organization and say, we should have gotten 2 more games out of this.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
but what I'm saying is that would not have fixed Royce Lewis hitting horribly or Miranda hitting horribly. That wouldn't have fixed the injuries. But even if you just add another somewhat reliable 7th inning reliever or a veteran 5th starter who actually, I don't know, throws one pitch for them this season instead of DeSclafani, or a right-handed hitting outfielder that we've been calling for years, who is a little better than Manny Margot.
Right. Well,
that equals enough wins to at least get you stumbling across the finish line and into October, despite all these things that have gone.
And it doesn't cost you $30 million either. Like you could have spent $5 million, $4 million, $3 million at the trade deadline, and been able to pick up something. Or been if you're not insisting everybody else pick up your salary cap on this, Right. So.
And again, this also goes back to, I even reject the premise of cutting $30 million in payroll, quote unquote, saving them $30 million.
Right, of course.
I am quite certain they thought that was going to be the case. But this goes back to, just because someone's a billionaire and they own a $1 billion business doesn't mean that they're geniuses at it. Right. I think anybody in their right mind, if you laid out the circumstances involved here, coming off, like we said, the euphoria of last season, would have said, well, okay, you're cutting $30 million like today. What's the monetary impact for the next 6 months or 6 years or 6 generations?
Well,
you're going to lose a whole lot more than $30 million worth of ticketing and fan interest and playoff revenue and everything.
Well, I mean, listen.
And that's what's so stupid.
I would look at it 3 ways on this. I'd look at it, first of all, look how much money you spent to get to the point that you were relevant, where you have become won postseason games. Like, you made changes throughout the organization. You continually invested in the organization. You spent $1 billion on payroll over that 10-year period where you were not very good. And you finally got to the point where now you are in the bonus round. Like, now you are playing for real money in the postseason, right? You're paying for real fan interest. So they failed to follow up $1 billion worth of investment, and God knows how much bandwidth and effort, with another $20-30 million, right?
That's one. Has literal no impact on them at all.
Yeah. Okay. Present. You say they've fell short of 300,000 short of what their attendance figure was.
What I'm talking about there is they drew slightly over 1.9 million last year, and I was told coming into the season that their internal projections were somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3 million. And they were hoping it would climb higher if they were successful. Right. They're not even going to get to last year's mark. Right. Okay. They're going to fall 20,000 short of last year.
If you assume those 300,000 each is going to spend $50 at the ballpark, right? Between tickets, concessions, all the other stuff.
Right.
That's $15 million right there.
Right.
That's present. So even if you thought you were saving $30 million this year, you're actually saving $15.
And then, of course, the lag effect is their attendance is not going to get better next year. It's going to get even worse.
And then, because of their actions. I would suggest that both of those are a drop in the bucket compared to the future revenues that they have lost out of this. How many millions per year for the next 15 or 20 or 30 years did they squander from a generation of Twins fans? The reason they are successful now is because they had some run. The reason there are so many fans our age who are a fan of the Twins is because we saw runs at 87 and 91. Correct. The reason that you had a run, you've got a decent amount of fan interest is because the aughts had a run of successful seasons and a couple of early playoff appearances that made it all the way to the ALCS, right? And you had a chance to do that over 2024, 2025, 2026. Right. Now, maybe things will still happen in 2025, 2026. You squandered all that maybe for $30 million this year, maybe for as little as $4 or $5 million over the last 2 months.
Correct.
All of that put it to jeopardy. And guess what? As a result, you ended up 1 or 2 games short.
Right. So again, we can finish on the note that we said at the beginning, where we kind of take two different approaches.
Yeah.
You've squandered it purely on the field, which I tend to focus on, with the moves that you could have made and kneecapped yourself on from a front office standpoint, and then you whiffed on those moves. And the culmination of that was that you missed the playoffs by 2 games in an imminently winnable situation. If you would have just played poorly for the last 6 weeks, below 500, you would have waltzed into the playoffs. Instead, you were the worst team anybody ever seen, and you fell out of it. And then from your standpoint that you tend to look at it is from a fan perspective or a bigger picture.
Or a business perspective.
Well, that too, you have botched it in the short term, like you said, where I don't think they saved a nickel on the 2024 books. And then the effect of that is going to be crashing the 2025 books. And then the real effect of that is how many 12-year-olds who maybe kind of got into the Twins last year or would have gotten very into the Twins this year couldn't watch them on television, and their parents weren't motivated to bring them to the ballpark because the team sucked. Right. And now, guess what? They're Lynx fans or they're Wolves fans.
That's right. Or
they joined the band and they don't even care about sports. Whatever the hell it is.
Right. The culmination of that is
decades of lost revenue.
Yeah, and I would say the culmination of that is apparent in the same way that we're watching bad baseball over the last week or 6 weeks of the year. The culmination of that is apparent when you go to the ballpark and the only people that are there are the hardest core of hardest fans, and even half of them, because they're hardest of hardcore fans, are determined not to show up. Right. So
that's we'll shut up. We got a lot more to say,
right.
And we'll say it. We'll be back Monday on the Patreon side, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We will fully eulogize this team because they will be either completing the most miraculous last weekend comeback in the history of baseball, or they'll be dead and buried, and we can talk about it more maybe in terms of it's over. And also we'll have heard from, like, Baldelli has been hesitant to sort of look behind because he still wants to look ahead.
That's right.
And obviously Falvey, et cetera.
He's got one more game of that probably.
So we will come back Monday with some thoughts on the weekend, and maybe, hopefully I'll be able to talk to some people about some other topics and stuff like that and pass along those, that information. But we're also going to do our typical off-season thing, which some of that will be on the free show. A lot of it will be on the Patreon show. We're going to have guests. We're going to look ahead to the offseason from a payroll standpoint, free agency, trade.
If you'd like to react to this episode, we're probably going to have a mailbag soon.
Yeah, we'll do a mailbag.
We'll probably revisit our over-unders on one of the free shows. We'll probably do like special guests, like you said. Definitely the post-mortem episode next week, where we pretty much immediately get out of talking with Falvey and or Baldelli and sort of give a preview of what they think happened in the season and what they think might be happening in the off season.
By the way, that same
we'll see if they do
post-mortem from them,
right?
Was where all this payroll stuff started.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they were dropping hints that were different than usual.
That is correct.
About limitations and, I can't really say if the payroll is going to go up or down. I'm not sure. And that's where our spidey sense started to go.
That's right.
That's different.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening throughout this season, when the times were good, when the times were bad, and everything in between.
That's right.
Thank you especially to the Patreon subscribers. Yeah. And if you haven't signed up for the Patreon, I realize it's not the most appealing time to pay money to listen to a Twins podcast. But I will say this. I'm not super optimistic about the path ahead from a payroll standpoint and from a decision-making standpoint. But what I can tell you is I'm very certain that this offseason is going to be interesting in the sense that big decisions are going to be made.
Yeah.
Whether
maybe
it's
some hard decisions,
trading away guys to cut payroll, whether it's parting with some of these promising players that you've decided are not going to be part of the core.
Maybe it's making some changes throughout the organization.
And so we will be talking about that as it happens, and we'll also be kind of previewing a lot of that stuff. And I got a whole list actually of off-season topics because I've had a lot of time to sit in that press box and stare off into space and think about life and think about, should I go back to college? What should I do? And so I ended up just kind of jotting down stuff we can talk about in November and December and January. So I actually feel pretty good about the work that we can do on this front. We're putting in the work, is what I'm saying.
We will continue to build this community despite being cut off at the T's.
So we would love to have you join us, patreon.com/Gleeman. If not, thank you truly from both of us for listening all season, for sending in emails, for saying hi at the ballpark, whatever it is. We really do appreciate it. Even maybe more so when the times are tough. And it means a lot. And thank you to our sponsors.
Yeah, thank you to our sponsors who kept this episode free. It's Harry's, Bricksworth Beer Company. I'm stopping by there this weekend to thank them personally. Libsyn, BetterHelp. I'm not Libsyn. Hims, BetterHelp. Libsyn for hosting the podcast, by the way.
Sure.
And then Also, a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Star Brewing, now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. Stop by your favorite liquor store or Black Stack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew or try something new. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Gleeman.